cards is a lifestyle. Sports cards and we live now. Jeremy Lee in the building and every guest that you ever needed. Sports cards after hours keep the hobby heated. Updates, hobby talk like you never seen it. Sports cards live and none could ever beat it. Sports cards is a lifestyle. Sports cards and we live now. Welcome to another episode of Sports Cards Live with your host, Jeremy Lee.
All right, everybody. Welcome to episode number 215 of Sports Cards Live. It is Saturday night, February the 3rd, 2024. My name is Jeremy Lee. I would like to thank everybody who tuned in last week for our episode with Stephen Abendondolo of Filth Bomb Breaks. We had a great episode. You can check that out. Next Saturday, our guest is Paul Hickey from Sports Card Strategy. Tomorrow night, the PWCC Weekly Hockey Auctioning Watch Party does return, and Monday night we will have an episode of MC Mondays Live as well. I'd like to ask you to please join close to 500,000 people who have downloaded the Center Stage app across both iOS and Android for quick and accurate comps to price your cards and other card management features. You can build, organize, and share your collection with your friends and find other collectors to follow using their social sharing features. So check out their Instagram account and please join me in supporting the great team they have and the innovation they are undertaking. Also, use protection, practice safe swaps. VeriSwap is an app and middleman service that lets you securely trade cards through the mail. Every transaction up to $1 million in value is fully guaranteed by their guarantee, fully insured by their guarantee. Check them out on iOS and Android. And please join me and VeriSwap founder Raymond Lee for our every second Tuesday Instagram live episode of the VeriSwap Trade Desk, where we review 3 trades that took place on the platform over the past couple of weeks. And we asked you guys to choose which side you would prefer. And also, announcement, please join me in welcoming new Sports Cards Live sponsor. Last week's guest, Filth Bomb Breaks. The team at Filth Bomb offers live case and box breaks. As we learned last week, they do so with integrity and responsibility. If you enjoy group breaks and are looking for a company to break with, please check out Filth Bomb at filthbombreaks.com. Also, shout out Hobby News Daily. Great collection of content creators and writers. hobbynewsdaily.com for daily information and a daily podcast. And also shout out Leighton Sheldon, Just Collecting Vintage Breaks. Leighton will be joining us a little bit later for the Vintage Spotlight segment. And finally, you can now buy and sell tag graded cards on COMC. And Tag's new Tag X grading service is a game changer, now grading Pokemon, Lorcana, and other rounded corner TCGs. Visit taggrading.com if you value transparency and consistency in card grading. Thank you to all sponsors, partners, of course, our loyal viewers and listeners, you guys, all past guests, everybody for your ongoing support. If you are not yet subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast, please take a moment and do so. And as always, tonight, your comments and your questions are in play. So let's get to it. Tonight's guest started in the hobby in 1986 when he was at a local department store. He saw a cello pack of Topps Baseball and Chicago Cub Thad Bosley was on top. That's all it took. He actively collected until college, and he took a break and returned in 2015. He started the Wax Pack Hero blog in 2017 and the podcast in 2019. And from 2020 to 2023, he had a part-time LCS. His favorite players of all time, Ryan Sandberg, Michael Jordan, and Walter Payton. His favorite teams of all time, the Chicago Bulls, Chicago Bears, and the Chicago Cubs. He's originally from Sparland, Illinois, currently hailing out of Bloomington, Illinois. Let's bring him out, Mr. Mike Sommer. Welcome to Sports Cards Live. How you doing tonight, Mike?
Jeremy Lee, I'm doing great. I am happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
It is my pleasure. It's overdue. It's a long time coming. We go back a couple years now, and it's good. It's good to have you on. And before we jump in, did you go to a card show today? I know you did. Tell us. Let's kick it off with talking about the card show you went to, and maybe just a little bit about how you felt, what the vibe was like.
Yeah, I went to a show earlier today. There's a show in a town that's about 45 minutes away. It wasn't a huge show. I think maybe I would say about 15 dealers and probably somewhere around 50 tables, something like that. And it was packed. I got there about 10 minutes before it officially opened. There was already a crowd gathering around, and probably for the first 2 hours, it was shoulder to shoulder people. at this smallish show. And so there was a pretty good variety of modern. There was a decent amount of vintage that was there. There was some nice dollar boxes that I spent some time digging in. Had a lot of fun, and yeah, it was a pretty good show for being a fairly, non-publicized weekend, one day, single day show.
Nice to hit the local sort of. Is it a monthly show? Did you say?
No, I think this is only the second time they've ever had it. I think it's maybe quarterly.
Okay. And yeah, like we have our monthly local show. Well, one of them was actually today. I didn't get there. I went last time. I couldn't go today. I got to let people who have been watching this show for close to 4 years now, and if you've come and gone, you're new. You've seen me sitting in this room pretty much every episode, unless I've been traveling. Well, I am in the process of moving into a new house right now, Mike, and these last few days have been like moving days, officially moving out on the 14th of February. So I think next Saturday will be the last episode where I will be sitting in this environment. It'll be a brand new kind of background for me, and made me think of it because that's why I didn't get to our local show today, because I was busy taking carloads of stuff from the old house over the new house back and forth. I think I did 5 trips today. Luckily, the new place is less than 10 minutes away by car. So very, very happy to, I was sad to miss the local though. You never know what you're going to find at one of these local shows. What's your experience been in your, general region when you're going to a show and like looking for cards? Do you find you get lucky? Is it the same stuff over and over again? What's your experience like?
Yeah, I think it really just depends on the person and on the dealer, right? There's a few dealers that you see at all of the shows in our area, and a lot of times it's that stereotypical, they've got the same stuff every time. But then there's others that they come every couple months, and it's like every couple months it's a whole new set of display cases or boxes to be digging through. This one today, there was a mixture of dealers who were kind of the stereotypical dealers that we see in our area, but there was at least a handful that travel throughout the Midwest. And so, they were in some shows in Ohio, Indiana, Southern Illinois. They were kind of all over the last several weeks, and kind of what they said going forward into the next couple of weeks. And so their stuff was completely new to me. I had never seen it before. So it's really kind of hit and miss in our area anyway.
That's nice that you had a bit of mix. The local that I'm thinking about here, it's the same vendors for going on 15 years now for the most part. You get the odd new one here and there. But I got lucky last time. I found a really awesome card that I hadn't seen in a while, and I managed to snag it. So sometimes you do get lucky at our local shows. Let's say hello to everybody else. Hope you guys maybe got to some local shows. Hey, Jake Dahl, welcome to the show. Foul 5-ball, what's going on? Tyson's Corner, what's happening? Tyson, Robert Scott, good evening. Jeff McMahon, Bob Boozle says, give us the top tier tips, Mike. I don't want to be eating noodles out of a cup anymore. I hear that. Bob Boozle, Perk, welcome. Michael, Linda's first, what's going on? Says, love to hear about small town shows. Jeremy says, hey, Mike, I haven't seen Mike for a few years since the About the Cards podcast. Isn't that interesting? We are going to be talking about that when Leighton comes on, Jeremy. So get ready for that. Hobby Champs is here. Bob Boozle says, please do a mansion tour. I wish I could do a mansion tour, Bob Boozle. But I was thinking about when I leave here, maybe I'll show you guys kind of, you walk into my house and how do I get into this room just for fun. Brett Miles, what's going on, buddy? Good to see you, Brett. Eric Stefano, Peeps, welcome everybody to the show. Mike, why don't you, for those that don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your hobby history? You got that first pack in 1986. That's what sucked you in. But just run us through your hobby experience thus far.
Yeah, so 1986 is when it all got started. As a Cubs fan, I saw that cello pack, had Cub Thad Bosley right on top. That's what got me started. And from that point on, packs were 30 cents a pack or whatever back then. And my mom would buy me a few packs every week when she went to the grocery store. Found some more kids in our neighborhood that collected. I mean, it seemed like almost everybody was collecting back then. And year after year, I expanded a little bit more. I started to get into some football. And then as I got into my early high school days, late junior high and early high school, I started to add on basketball that when they started to become more and more available. And I collected pretty much everything I could get my hands on all throughout elementary school, junior high, and high school. And then I kind of took a break. And then in 2015, I don't even know how or why, or I think I was on ESPN and a DA Card World banner ad popped up. And I said, and it was talking about their Black Friday, Thanksgiving sale or whatever. And I said, yeah, I used to have a lot of fun collecting cards. I wonder what this is all about. And I started to explore a little bit more, bought a few boxes from DA Card World back then. That got me hooked, got connected with the local shop here in town. And from that point on, it didn't take me too long to realize that I was going to have a lot of fun with this. But if I was going to have a lot of fun getting back in the hobby, I was going to need to do something to help offset the cost of these cards. And so that got me started buying and selling collections to kind of make a little bit of profit to cover the cost of this newfound, or maybe I should say this rejoined hobby that I was going to be a part of again. So from 2016 on, it's just kind of continued to grow and build and get my solid base of understanding of how much the hobby had changed since the 80s and the 90s. And I've just been having a blast since. And now I kind of have both a hobby component and a business component when it comes to cards.
So right away, when you kind of came back, you immediately thought to yourself, I'm going to do this. I'm going to jump back in, but I want it to be self-sustaining. It sounds like you planned that right from the beginning. And I think, that's an interesting approach, especially if you're not going to dip into, your regular earnings from your job, your career, savings. It's got to be a challenge, but, how do you feel now? Here we are. That was 2015 or so. Here we are close to 10 years later. How do you feel? And we're going to get into how you do this for everybody to hear. But how do you feel that you've done so far? And yeah, just let me ask you that. How do you feel you've done so far? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's been a blast. It's been fantastic. So part of the reason that I wanted to make it self-sustaining hobby too is I've always had this entrepreneurial streak in me. There's always, since I was a kid, I was looking for ways to make a little bit of money. And so once I figured out that I would be able to do that with this other thing that I love, being cards, that just made it so much more fun. And there was some trial and error along the way, right? There's times where I tried to buy and sell and rip wax, and was I going to be able to make any money buying wax, ripping, and then trying to sell what was inside? Eventually I moved into the buying collections and buying and reselling from these bigger collections. And that really is where I hit the sweet spot. And the other thing that I have had a lot of success with that I think has allowed me to win is I'm a fairly low risk type of guy, right? And so a lot of the stuff that I've been buying and selling was base and insert cards. And those are things that a lot of people view as worthless garbage. And that meant that I was able to pick them up for fractions of a penny a piece. And that's just been so much fun to kind of utilize those types of cards to do my buying and selling. And so it's been great because over the last, 6-7 years that I've been doing this, I've built what I think is a fairly decent collection essentially for free. And I've, made some extra spending money along the way and money to be able to save and do some things along the way. So I would say, has it worked? Absolutely. It's worked. It's been fantastic.
Is it fair to say then that you didn't take this approach of the hobby self-sustaining because you needed to financially? Was it more like a challenge to yourself and based on your entrepreneurial spirit? And I ask because you can be wealthy, you can be average, you can be less than average wealthy, and you can probably still accomplish what you have. I think you told me, what was your seed capital to start with? It was low, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I would say part of it is the challenge, right? Yeah, it was and prioritization, right? So I prioritize our family. I prioritize saving for my girls' education, for their future college expenses, saving for retirement, and those types of things. And so I didn't want this hobby to take away opportunities for the rest of the family, whether that is what we're saving for in the future, going on vacation, whatever it might be. So it was more as the challenge than it was, need. There's money that I could use from my everyday budget if I wanted to be able to buy cards. But yes, it was more of a challenge. So I started with about $300 cash that I had set aside at the beginning, and a couple monster boxes of junk wax era cards that I still had from when I was a kid, and that's what I used to ultimately get started. I sold on eBay, on COMC, and Sportlots were the sites that I found and that I started to connect with and see some success. And so, yeah, over that period of time, I would buy a collection, sell it for more, use that money to cover the cost of a few boxes or singles that I wanted, and then buy some more collections and continue to scale that up. And at this point, I've kind of turned that $300 and a monster box of cards into, what do I've got? I've got about 380,000 cards listed in my inventory on Sportlots. I've got 155,000 cards of inventory on COMC, plus all of the eBay inventory that I've got listed. And so all of that has been purchased, listed, all paid for with profits from buying and selling.
So, okay, you see my face going like I'm bamboozled. I mean, I'm bamboozled by this, by some of the quantity, the magnitude of the volume you're dealing with. And the biggest question I have with all, you talk about all these listings on Sportlots and all the listings on eBay. My question does not necessarily apply to COMC. And you'll know why when I ask you this. But my question is, how did you find time to list almost 200,000 cards, I think you said, on Sportlots, and also the shipping and the organization, the inventory management? How do you, I mean, listen, you've got a system. It obviously works, but my mind is blown, Mike, that you managed to make it work. You have this organ, but also the shipping, the time it takes to deal with if you're selling a card for 75 cents, and it's not on COMC, so there's actual shipping to deal with. 75 cents for a card, or $1.50 or $3.25, whatever it is, these real low end cards that you referred to earlier as like worthless for the most part. How do you find the time? How are you organized? Like, just you can tell how my mind is racing. There's so much going on here. It sounds like an absolute labor nightmare. Tell me how you make it work.
Yeah, there's no getting around that it does take work, right? You can make money doing this. I have made money doing this, but it definitely does take work. And so there's a couple things there. Is I also enjoy it, right? There's things that I enjoy about that. So there's times where we're as a family watching shows in the evening, where we'll have a show on TV, and I'll have a box of cards out on the floor sitting there with the family, and I'll be, sorting and organizing and things like that. And so there's times where it's able to be worked in to situations like that. The other thing is I'm an early riser. And so I get up on my own. Like, I just wake up. I haven't set an alarm clock in probably 10 years. I wake up probably between 4:45 and 5 pretty much every day. And that gives me at least a couple hours before I start, I need to be at my day job and that type of thing, to fill orders and do some of those types of things for what came in overnight, or what's been, if something needs to be listed, or I've got some time to list. And so I've got a couple hours there to do some of the pull, packing and shipping, listing. That's when I do some of the blog or podcast recordings and things like that when I'm recording the podcast. And so a lot of that work is done then. And then, I don't waste a lot of time, right? So I'm pretty intentional about my time throughout the rest of the day, and setting aside a little bit of time in the late afternoon or evening when I get home from work to check in on some of those types of things. And then for 3.5 years, when I was running the card shop part-time, I had several hours on Saturday and Sunday afternoons where I would be at the shop and there wouldn't be customers needing my full attention. And I would utilize a lot of that time to get things organized and ready to get listed as well. And so all of those things together allowed me to kind of find the time to be able to put in the work to do this.
Yeah. So, okay. Couple follow-up questions. First, how do you decide what card to list on which platform between COMC, Sportlots, and eBay. And, I'm kind of asking this question so you can give advice to the audience, because maybe someone out there is thinking, you know what, maybe it's not as tough as I thought it was, or, not as work. Like you said, it is hard work, but maybe you'll inspire some people to try the same thing.
Yes. So Sportlots I found that site because I was a set collector when I was a kid. When I first got back into the hobby, I was building sets, and it was one of the few places that you could go and find random commons that you needed to complete your Topps flagship set or your Allen and Ginter set or whatever it might be. And so as I was building these sets, or I was buying some of these wax boxes when I first got back, I was needing cards to fill out these sets. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do with these extras? How am I going to sell them? I'm not going to sell a common on eBay, right? That was the only place I was familiar with at the time. But Sportlots was a perfect site because there were more people like me. And so Sportlots, I sell kind of your standard base cards, your standard inserts and parallels and things like that. Typically on Sportlots, it's going to be cards that range from their site minimum of 18 cents up to $2 to $3 is probably kind of where I cap out for most of my listings on Sportlots. And then eBay is, at this point now, I use eBay for cards that typically are going to be $10 and up, plus $20 and up, plus complete sets and some of the memorabilia and that type of thing. That's what I usually sell on eBay. If you go out on eBay, you'll see a lot of other random stuff that I buy and sell. We can talk about that if you want to, that I've got into some other reselling. I saw American Arbitrage on. He's kind of inspired me to get into reselling some other things. But and then COMC is what I use primarily for cards that are worth between $1 and $20. And that site lets you scale, right? Like you mentioned, you don't have the same labor involved when you sell on COMC because they take care of so much of the work for you. And so that trifecta, that combination of Sportlots, COMC, and eBay has really been a great fit for me.
Sounds like you have it pretty well figured out. One of the things you do have to do on COMC is update your prices. If something happens to an athlete, a good or bad, you might want to, a card could triple in value overnight and somebody can go in and just grab it. I think there's people that kind of stalk COMC looking for those opportunities quite regularly. If you could, you said an 18-cent minimum on Sportlots. So have you ever sent out a card, like one card that you got 18 cents for? And if so, how do you justify the time and effort that goes into generating 18 cents in revenue?
Yeah, so it's 18 cents is the selling price of the card plus shipping, right? So then they're paying, $1 or whatever it is for shipping, right? So it's not like I'm losing money on all of those, right? So it's 18 cents plus shipping. And so I'd say, what's it justifying the cost of that? I think you got to look at it in total over the course of the month, And so, last month I sold over 3,000 cards on Sportlots. Some of those were one card orders for 18 cents. Some of them were one card orders for $3. And one of them was like a 560 something card order that came from about 4 different sets out of 2 monster boxes that took me 25 minutes or something to fill. Right. And so it was like $150 order in 20 minutes. And so in total, it's worth it, right? When you're clearing $1,000 or more or whatever for the month, even though that one single order may not have been. And so, but when you look at it in total, it's a numbers game. It just it works.
I want to ask you another question about, there's a lot of discussion out there in the hobby. There has been for years now, collecting versus investing. It sounds like it's different. It sounds like you're kind of a unique case where I believe you're certainly a collector, and I don't necessarily see you as, from what I know, as an investor in that you're buying cards to quick flip or you're buying cards to hold long-term. I think you're more investing in just inventory, simply, it's really that part of the hobby for you, your activity. It's simply a business so that you can achieve your goal of building your collection with those profit, and therefore not dip into your own saving. Does that make sense? Is that about right?
Yeah. So I think that if you want to, how would I say this? I would say it depends on how you define invest. I would say what I take advantage of is arbitrage. I find opportunities to buy these collections full of cards. Base and insert, I'm a lot of times getting for a penny or less. And I know that I've got outlets to sell them for 18 cents to a quarter or $1 or $1.50 or $2, right? So, a lot of what I would understand is arbitrage is a form of investment. And that's the type of investment that I would make in the cards. But yeah, I'm buying inventory at a real low price because I know I've got platforms to sell them for more later. It's very low risk, what I'm talking about and what I do. But yeah, I don't buy cards with the hope of appreciation. I buy cards that I know that I can resell for a higher price than I paid.
And you can generate that profit, that premium, by putting in the work. It's really like it's really simple with you. You can buy collections at discounts because very few people, I dare I say, no one except Mike Sommer, and I might in the future say no one, and then always say except Mike Sommer wants to do the work. But because you put in the work, you get really good deals on big, as you should, because it's hours and hours of labor to get the stuff done and actually, exploit these cards to the best that you can. And not only exploit them, but get them into good homes where they eventually want to be with collectors. So I think it's great, man. I think it's great. And I'm glad there's somebody out there doing that. I don't think I could. So I certainly commend you. Let's go to some comments. We've had a few come in since we last did. Leighton Sheldon has joined the green room, so we'll bring him up as soon as we're done that. How's that sound, Mike? Good?
Yeah, great.
All right. So I want to say hello to Craig's Cards. Craig, what is going on? By the way, I owe you another email, and I know that, and it's just a time issue. Chris C., what's going on? Royals 417 says, love the Wax Pack Hero podcast. Bob Boozle says, Chicago pitcher Steve Trout had what the kids call Riz on those 1980s baseball cards. Thanks, Bob Boozle. Mark Santucci is here. What's going on? Mark, American Arbitrage Cards. Love seeing Mike on. I love having Mike on the show, American Arbitrage, and welcome you to the channel and to the show tonight. Chris says, I love wax of all eras, but to me, nothing beats the wax you opened as a kid. The memories last a lifetime, unlike that horrible gum. Okay, Chris, I have an issue with that. I love that horrible gum. I wish I could still get it, but Chris is right, Mike. I collect unopened packs, and I collect unopened packs of, well, more than just this, but 80s O-Pee-Chee. That's what I grew up opening the most. Tops and basketball, baseball too, football as well. But I want those packs because of what Chris C. says, those memories last a lifetime. And I want to keep those memories sharp. I want to keep them alive in my head. 90s hockey collectors, what's going on? Good to see ya. Bob Boozle says Mike Sommer is a card listing dynamo. I think that's well put. I couldn't think of a better way to do it. Fellow Five Ball, whose name is Jeremy, has a question for you, Mike. He says, do you still complete sets yourself?
I do, but not the modern sets that I was doing, right? So when I was getting back into it, like I said, I went crazy. I was getting Topps Flagship, Allen and Ginter, Gypsy Queen. I was, the basketball, Panini Donruss. I was getting everything. Now I've scaled that back. I'm not getting as much modern. My focus for the last couple of years has been building out my vintage run. And so over, probably since 2017, 2018, when I got started with that, I've completed all the way back through the 70s. I am now working on the 50s and 60s. And so I finished off 69, 68, 67, 60, 61. I'm on my last 40 cards of 66. And I've got 4 cards left that I need from the 59 Topps baseball set. So a vintage baseball are the sets that I'm working on now.
And because you just had those needs, the amount of cards per set that you need right at the tip of your tongue. Do you also know who you need, like which 4 you need to finish the set? Not that I need to know who they are, but do you know who you need?
Yeah.
Yep.
Not of the 66s. It's a bunch of the high numbers, and so there's some commons and stuff in there, but they're a little bit pricey. But I don't know all of those 66, but the 459s I need, I know.
Yeah, you're down to 4 for sure. Michael says Mike takes his hobby seriously. He sure does. He certainly does. Chris says I'd like to sell some stuff, but not giving my great cards away either. Mike, do you see a bottom coming? Vintage seems to hold value unlike anything. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we've seen cards come down over the last few years. I think overall demand from a quantity perspective is still higher than it was, you know, before the run up that we saw. I don't do a lot of trying to pick a bottom or time the purchases of those types of things, or think it's going to turn around. Again, a lot of the stuff that I'm buying and selling, it's unaffected by the rises and falls that we've seen from some of the high end cards or some of those big movers. So while I think that things have pulled back and normalized quite a bit, I think for some things it's probably going to go a little bit lower. I think for some things we're starting to see prices tick back up a little bit. So we're probably somewhere in the middle from my perspective.
We're always somewhere in the middle. We're always, well, maybe not always somewhere in the middle, but the cycles never end. We'll do a couple more comments, and we'll bring Leighton up for the vintage spotlight. I don't know how to say this guy's name. GZ says, will Mike ever embrace blockchain and sell digitized ownership of these cards, keeping the physical card? Just yes or no on this one, Mike.
Maybe. I'm not opposed to NFTs and blockchain, but I'm not ready to jump headfirst into it yet.
Bobby Burrell says, hey guys, utilizing your knowledge and experience to help pay for your collection has been working for me for 25 years. Yeah, knowledge is power in many, many different areas. Mark Santucci wants to know who was the 18-cent player card, if you can recall.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I mean, I've got a lot of 18-cent cards listed, so I can't remember them.
Not a star. Like we're talking commons, right?
Yeah, mostly commons, or it could be a star that is, you know, their 10th year card or something like that.
Chris C says selling today is more complicated, seems to me. Many want to pay just a fraction of the most recent comp sale. Not every card is something. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't come across those buyers that often who want to pay a fraction of recent comp. If you're talking commodity cards, sure, people want the best deal. But rare cards, you can set your price, I think, for the most part. Sean Robb wants to know, have you seen Sportlots sales volume increase in your time on the site, Mike? And then we're going to bring Leighton up after this one.
Yeah, easy answer would be yes, both for me, and then also overall volume on the site has increased. And I'd say that they've got some like tiers of sellers based on minimum sales thresholds, and the number of sellers in those higher tiers has increased over the last several years for sure, meaning there's more people selling more cards.
And Sean Robb is the only other person besides you that I know who sells on Sportlots. So, but it sounds like you're selling a ton of cards there. When we come back after the Vintage Spotlight segment, my question is going to be, why don't more people know about Sportlots? Save that. Yep. You remember what that question is going to be when we come back. And with that, guys, let's go ahead and bring on Mr. Leighton Sheldon for the Vintage Spotlight segment here Saturday nights on Sports Cards Live. Nice haircut, Leighton. How you doing, buddy? You look good.
Good. Thanks for having me on. How are you, Mike?
Good. How are you, Leighton?
Oh, very well, thanks. Appreciate you having me.
You guys actually go back a little bit. When I was talking to Mike earlier this week, Leighton, he mentioned to me that you guys might have sat together on the podcast that was mentioned earlier on in the episode tonight. I forget what it was. About the cards. You guys said, do you remember that, Leighton, being with Mike on About the Cards?
I don't want to lie and say, no, I don't.
It's a while ago.
I can barely remember what my son and I ate earlier today. But I'm sure it was fun.
Yeah. I sat in. I was guest hosting. They have 3 normal hosts, and I was sitting in for one of them guest hosting, and you were the featured guest that week. But it was probably 2018 or something like that. 2019.
That seems like,
it was a while ago. 2018, 2019, something like that.
Well, I'm glad you guys can reacquaint here on Sports Cards Live here on Saturday night, February the 3rd, 2024. Mike, as you know, and as the audience knows by now, I always ask our guests to come with a question, a topic for Leighton, something with a vintage spin to it. So, Mike, what do you got for Leighton tonight?
Yeah, so we just a few minutes ago we were talking about some of the vintage sets that I've been building over the last few years, and the approach that I've always taken, just I don't know why, that's just what I've done, is I've always kind of built out the commons and built out some of the lower tier stuff first, and I've saved those big stars and some of those big hitters for last. But I know there's other people who do the opposite. They buy those big hitters first and then fill in everything else later. And so with you having such a background in vintage, I'm sure you've helped multiple people complete vintage sets that and pick up some of those cards that they've been wanting. I guess I was interested in your perspective on the pros and cons of either of those approaches or both of those approaches, or if you had some additional suggestions on ways to maybe approach vintage set building.
Well, Mike, I can help you with this very easily by saying, hey, just sell whatever you have now. Because, I don't know if Jeremy did this on purpose, but timing wise, he has me sitting in the green room and you're rattling off like 1960s sets. And I'm like, what are you guys doing to me? But, the joking aside, Mike, really great question. I don't know that there's a right or a wrong. I have a little bit of a different philosophy than you've implemented that I've recommended to others. And I've also, I guess, have learned myself what works for me. And my advice would be, if you're going to be working on one or several sets, I personally like to go after the stars or the key rookie cards first. And the reason why I like to do that is because I feel like just us as humans, we change our path often. And if you end up, for example, Mike, it seems like you have been involved in dozens of sets. If you decide for whatever reason or another, waking up on the wrong side of bed, that you no longer want to complete your 1965 top set, for example, in baseball, which doesn't even have a particularly rare high number series, but nonetheless, the sets from the 60s typically cost more for the high numbers. What I worry about for collectors that want to complete vintage sets, if you go out and spend hundreds of dollars and you end up, let's just say you get 80 cards, a couple hundred cards from the 1965 Topps baseball set, it might feel really good. And I know myself, even as a 40-something-year-old man, I still love having all these cards around me, man. Absolutely. But if you decide to bail on that said project or that said set, it will be so much easier for you, Mike, or the fellow collector who might be listening to this now or in the future, to actually get out of it and not lose your butt. Because if you paid $300 for a Steve Carlton rookie, you might get 200 or 250. And of course, you're taking a loss. But I can tell you firsthand, if you brought to me at Just Collect, hey, I have this partial 65 Topps baseball set with 308 cards, and I virtually have no stars, no rookie cards, and no key cards. Even if I was interested, I don't really piece out those cards. I would simply just sell it as a lot. And so kudos to you, Mike, because it seems like you wouldn't do that. But at least to me, I think it's a lot safer to start with the stars and rookies in key vintage sets. The big drawback, though, is this. You need a lot more money to do what I'm suggesting. Because you can go out and literally start. Think about it. You could start a 1965 Topps baseball set 2 nights on eBay for as little as $20. You could start having common cards come into your home. But let's just say you do this for 25 weeks in a row, and you've now spent $500. I'm telling you, you are so much better off spending that first $500 acquiring the Carlton rookie, or I guess the mantle, depending on which way you want to go. And I just think you're going to be setting yourself up for a much better position to either complete the set, or if you decide to bail on the set and go in a different direction, I think it'll be a little bit easier to sell off the assets, i.e. the cards from that set, and actually recoup either most, if not all, the money in a lot easier of a fashion. That's my take.
Yeah, makes sense. I can see that.
Leighton, do you have anything to? First of all, thank you, Mike, for the question. Leighton, great comprehensive response. Do you have any topic you'd like to introduce to the discussion?
Oh, I do, because I was fascinated listening for a few minutes before I hopped on. Mike, how the heck, and I love COMC. I've known Tim since he founded it. He actually founded it almost the same year as I founded Just Collect, like 17 or 18 years ago. I literally have thousands of cards on COMC right now that are available for sale, but I also have thousands of cards, Mike, that are not priced out. And I'm curious, how would you recommend to me and to others to utilize COMC properly, to not spend all of my waking hours or getting up at 4:45, as I heard you say, to price out my cards on COMC? Because I mean, I can't do that. So what do you have as far as suggestions?
Yeah, I have, for me, that's not been a challenge. Because I enjoy that process so much. I enjoy it so much. So the things that I'm using when I'm trying to come up with a competitive price, it comes down to a couple things. Primarily, how many of the same card is already on the site? You know, if there's a handful of cards that are on the site already, generally I've got a feel for what the value of this one's going to be, and I try to price my cards competitively to the others that are on there. If it has a low sell-through rate, I might try to be the cheapest on the site. If it seems like the sell-through rate's a little bit higher, I don't necessarily need to be the cheapest, because it won't be too much longer before I become the cheapest by listing things on the site. If it's something that's more rare and unique, and I have what they call a COMC monopoly, I've got the only one that's going to be listed. A lot of times I'll use a kind of a comparison with eBay of what that card or a similar card is selling for on eBay, just to make sure that I'm going to be priced comparatively. And so I will utilize kind of an eBay comparison to price those others. But then as far as just the logistics of doing it, whether it is listing on eBay, whether it's listing on Sportlots, or whether it's listing on COMC, what I've found works for me is just to set aside some dedicated time, whether that's 15 minutes, whether that's a half hour or an hour a day, whatever it would be that you can set aside as dedicated time to get in there and price those cards and kind of just work through that backlog of things that you've got waiting to be priced. That's what's been helpful for me, is just being intentional with your time and setting that time aside.
Well, it's very impressive, Mike. And I can tell you, and this is my issue, anytime that I generally would have set aside, a block of time for something like that, I feel like there's other things that are calling my name. And I'm just talking professional. I'm not even talking personal responsibilities. And so I was going to ask you, how many cards can you price an hour on COMC? Because I've tried to test myself, and if you want to do it with intention, it's difficult to do it super duper fast.
Yeah, and I don't know that I've got a good answer, because of the way that it, cards I submit, the way that they drop in there. Typically, they're, 10, 20, 30 cards get dropped in a given time, and it doesn't take all that much time to go through and do those. Every once in a while, if I'm buying cards on site to flip, I buy and flip a lot of the EPAC cards from Upper Deck. Again, I don't have a problem buying a card for a penny or 2 cents, repricing it for 38 cents on COMC and waiting for it to sell. There's some shortcuts. If you're buying a bunch of cards that are all the same and you're going to price them the same, you can hit * and it automatically puts in the price of the previous card that you listed. And so I can have a listing of 400 or 500, EPAC cards that I just bought to flip, and I can just hit *, just punch the star button, and it's going to drop down that 38-cent price. And I can price, 100 cards or whatever shows up on the screen in, a minute and a half. So it doesn't take that long. It just depends on what exactly you are going through and pricing.
As fast as you can hit that star button, just
Yep.
Yeah, Mike, if you don't mind, maybe you could drop me your information later. I think I have some questions for you.
Absolutely.
There you go. Right on. Good stuff, guys. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people have some of these issues, and we had a couple of comments that have come through it all. I'll just run through them. We're not going to get into these right now, but Perk says, I do the same thing as Mike, but only on eBay. I have a good following there, but am I missing out by not listing on other platforms? Well, I'm glad for Perk's for Perk that we're actually discussing it right now and talking about some of the things that do go into it. Bill Bett says, me too. I still have over 12,000 cards to price on COMC. I find myself buying more than I can price. I mean, but the thing is, and even for Leighton, imagine having to also scan and ship and leave feedback and everything else that go to the post office, all these things. At least all you need to do is price. And it's something to be said when even that can be a drain. That can be a challenge. But for Mike, it's time management, it's discipline, and it's commitment. That's how he does it. You asked and I wondered the same thing. How do you do it? I think those three things are how he does it. So good stuff. Leighton, I want to thank you for joining us for the Vintage Spotlight segment here, as we do on most Saturdays. Any final comments or announcements or anything going on at Just Collect Vintage Breaks you'd like to mention? As well as I want to let everybody know to do subscribe and listen to your podcast, Trading Card Therapy. Final words to you, Leighton.
Sure. I just wanted to share something, and it'd be fun to listen to you and Mike discuss it when I hop off. So something I was really into, a number of years ago when I had a little bit more time on my hands was TTM collecting and collecting autographs through the mail. That's kind of ceased for me in recent time, just for one reason or another. However, if you go to my blog at blog.justcollect.com, I recently bought a group of cards, and I think it had like 5 or so Nolan Ryan rookies. And literally, like, a light went off in my head. I'm like, oh my goodness, I think that Ryan still signs through the foundation. And, it was one of those things where, like, I bought the collection, even though Nolan Ryan rookies are great in any condition, they weren't high grade. I wasn't that excited. But then I turned, like, marginal excitement into, like, this super fun, hey, what inscriptions am I going to get? So on and so forth. And so I dropped them off in the mail, literally like almost like when you send out cards for grading. And I just kind of forgot about it. And then they just came back this week. I'm going to post on it on social and IG. I'll tag the show, Jeremy. But I wanted to basically ask a question, but also share a tip. So my tip is this. Folks, there's a website. I forgot the name of it. I'm sure someone from the community knows. There's really great information out there if you want to write to former players through the mail. Obviously, Nolan Ryan doesn't do it for free, but that was really cool. I was fairly comfortable to submit the cards through the mail, even though there was rookies, because you're making a donation to the Nolan Ryan Foundation. And so I guess my question for Mike and the tip for the audience is like, hey, make sure you go through these cards that you're collecting and see if there's any fun rookies or even veterans you can send away through the mail. Mike, do you TTM collect? And if you do, how bad has the bug caught you? And are you setting aside rookie cards the way that I ferociously was doing for years and years? I'm curious if that is something that you've done or do now.
No, I have not done it anytime recently. I did it when I was a kid. There's a few Isaiah Thomas. I'm not sure if it was a legit return or not. It came back as Isaiah. Mark Price was a good one. He sent back a letter with his as well. Rex Chapman, Chris Morris. I went after just a variety of different people. So I did that some when I was younger, but I haven't done TTM much at all as an adult.
Well, it definitely takes a lot of time. I know for me, I haven't been doing it that much. And of course I paid the Nolan Ryan Foundation, but it was extremely satisfying. Like, it was fun. I'm going to maybe take, one of the ones with the multiple inscriptions and keep that, sell off the others. I don't know if I'll make any money. It's just a fun little project and a really cool way to deal with some off-grade, desirable cards that were vintage.
Very cool.
Right on. Well, Leighton, thank you for coming back again. Guys, follow Leighton at Leighton_Sheldon and just_collect on Instagram. His podcast, Trading Card Therapy. Leighton, always a pleasure. Love when you drop the knowledge bombs. Good to see you, buddy. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take it easy.
Yep. See ya.
All right. So, as I said before you came on, I wanted to pick up where we left off, which was, why don't more people, maybe they know about it, but why aren't more people talking about Sportlots? Like, again, I only know 2 people who use it. You and Sean Robb, who was in the chat.
I'm not sure. They don't have a very heavy presence on social media. I'm not seeing marketing anywhere really. I've not seen them advertise really on too many other platforms. But other than that, I can't really say. I mean, the design of the site, and the owner will admit this, it looks like it was, I call it like GeoCities for cards. Like, it was designed on, the old original, web design software. Right. And they're going through a process to upgrade that a little bit right now. But I think sometimes people see it and they just look at it and it's like, this looks outdated, but it's very functional for the purpose and the target market of set builders and some player collectors and things like that. It works for its purpose, and there's a lot of people that still use it, but no, it does not have the notoriety of some of the other major online marketplaces.
Interesting. I mean, it doesn't, but yet it's obviously running a business. You're doing well in there yourself. I know Sean does well in there himself as well. Again, Sean Robb, who's in the chat, and a friend of mine. Okay, let's go through some more comments, and I want to get into a few new topics that things that have piqued your interest really as of late. A couple things that have come through. First, Chris C says, "Have you guys seen the 79 O-Pee-Chee sealed hockey case that's up for auction at Heritage? It's he says easily it's probably going to go for more than $2 million." It's so funny, Chris C and Mike too. Like I get into my car, I turn on the radio, they're talking about this O-Pee-Chee hockey case from 1979 out of Saskatchewan. And it's like everybody, I've had more people reach out to me asking me about her. It's and the funny thing, like you guys, everybody watching this, you all know that me, you, all of us who are here tonight gathered watching the show, being a part of it, we like live and breathe this hobby. So of course we know about it. I got people texting me saying, "Have you heard this?" Like they're sending it to me as if I haven't seen it before. It's kind of like, of course I know about it. I'm sure a lot of us are experiencing that, and we're feeling the same way. Of course, it's kind of funny, but yes, of course, we have seen that, and I'm sure most people by now have. We'll see it's going to be exciting to see what that does sell for. Do you have anything to say about that recent find, Mike?
Oh, it'd be awesome to find something like that, to uncover something like that in the back of a store, or, some old 5 and dime store that, there's somebody that I interacted with on Twitter. I think we were talking about some non-sports stuff, and he came about as close as you can get to a similar find with some non-sports stuff from the 70s and 80s from somebody in their town that had an old department store, 5 and dime, candy store or something. And in the back, when they eventually were cleaning it out, they found a whole bunch of unopened boxes of some of that kind of stuff. But none of it had the value that the O-Pee-Chee would have.
Yeah, that is an absolute crazy find. Hello to Tip of the Mitt. Good to see you. Welcome back. Says he's thinking about tackling the 54 Topps baseball set. Beautiful, beautiful set. I love it. Absolutely. Bob Boozle said, "Something tells me Mike Sommer is like a pit bull. Once he chases a set and bites down, he won't let go until he finishes it." That is a committed. Is that accurate, Mike? Is Bob accurate on that?
Yeah, I would say once I've committed to it, I am going to finish it. I can be patient. I don't have to, drop everything and get all of those missing cards like within a few weeks or anything like that. But yeah, when I've decided that that's the one I'm going to complete, I will track it down until it's done.
I love that. You just said, you will be patient. Me too. When I tackle a new project, I don't need to get it done as fast as possible. I enjoy that. I want to stretch it out. I want to savor the process. I like these 10, 15, 20 year projects. I've got a couple on the go, and they're very, very at least for me, I find them highly enjoyable. Hello to Alan Terwell from Waxstat. Good to see you, bud. Welcome to the show. Bill Bett says, "I wish if I had 100 of the same card, I could just enter the price one time for all 100, not one at a time." Yeah, there are some shortcuts, as Mike mentioned earlier on COMC. GR wants to know, do you pay separate fire, theft, and water insurance for the cards? And do you keep, and this is maybe something you don't want to discuss, I don't know, but is your inventory all located on your home premises, and do you have everything insured properly?
Yeah, most of it is, and it's probably not. There's probably more that I could do from an insurance perspective. I'll just say that.
Cool. Oh yeah, I mean, fair enough. Thank you for responding. Mark Santucci picked up a Brian Leach rookie on either your COMC or your Sportlots since the show started. So very cool. Thanks for that. Mark. Jake Dahl says, "Is it FanBiz for the TTM addresses, the website that maybe that was what Leighton was talking about?" Leighton, maybe it was, Jake. Maybe it was. Alan says, "I got a Fernando Valenzuela on an 87 Fleer card through the mail." Very cool. I I remember the Fernando Valenzuela hype in the early 80s, and Bobby Burrell, also of Sports Card Daily, says Hobby News Daily, as the hobby was on an upward trend in 19 and 20, the drop over the last year has likely had those two graph lines actually meet at this point. Yeah, I mean, we're coming back to where we were at one point in time for sure. Mark Santucci knows two other people who also use Sportlots. Good to know. Good to know. And Michael watched them certify that 7980 O-Pee-Chee case on video. The boxes were snow white. You don't see them like that. Yeah, I saw that video too. They looked really cool. Okay, Mike, let's switch it up. I want to talk about your podcast for a moment here. I want to talk about, first of all, what inspired you to start your podcast?
Yeah, so I would say it really kind of goes back to what inspired me to start the blog, right? And what inspired me to start the blog was the whole story of me getting back into the hobby and how much everything had changed, and the process that it took for me to figure out, wait, there's only one manufacturer of licensed baseball cards, and at that time there was only a couple who made football and only one that makes hockey. Like, what do you mean this is all single manufacturers, and the price of everything, and selling on and buying and selling online, and all the different marketplaces that exist online? All of these things were new, and it took a while for me to figure them out. And so eventually I got to the point where if I'm having this much of a challenge, boy, wouldn't it be nice if maybe I could create something that other people who are returning to the hobby could use to help that education come a little bit quicker for them. And that's kind of the inspiration for why I wanted to start the blog and what I wanted to share on the blog. But the inspiration to actually do it came from Sports Card Radio, of all things. I listened to them. I was a podcast listener, and they were one of the first ones I found. And yeah, there was a lot of nonsense that got spewed, but they also shared a lot of insights on what it was like running a shop, suggestions on running a website that they had success doing. And one of the things that they preached was, hey, don't just rely on cards, but create content that can be out there and be helpful and people will find valuable and that you own, and you can write about new things. You can write about old things, just create content and own a piece of that. And so Sports Card Radio was actually the inspiration for me to actually get off my butt and start to do that and start creating content. And so the inspiration to help and guide people, that was what I wanted to write about at the time. But Sports Card Radio was the reason that I actually started doing it. And so
you were,
oh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to ask, like, back then when you were listening to the Sports Card Radio podcast, I mean, back in 15, 16, 17, and because I wasn't searching out content. I was active in the hobby, but I wasn't searching out content back then. How many options were there back then to listen to and to find hobby content in the pod? This is probably really predates the proliferation of YouTube channels offering hobby content now. But how many different hobby podcasts were there back then, if you can recall?
Back then, probably 4 or 5. I mean, so they were creating. They had their show. Beckett had a show. The Fat Packs podcast that was out. There were a couple others that they're no longer around either at this point, but they were going on. But there was 4 or 5, and then kind of John Newman started his show a little bit after that, and he was one of the ones I think that started the more recent wave that we've seen of sports card podcasts. But there was probably only 4 or 5 that I can remember that I was aware of.
Wow, not a lot to choose from back then, but I'm glad you found inspiration through Sports Card Radio. That's definitely pretty cool. Bob Ouzel says Sports Card Radio put together a very fine program. I think he's talking about their early podcast. Okay, let's get into some topics. Anonymity of hobby content creators. You did an episode about it. If you could just sort of give us your thoughts on kind of what motivated you to create that episode, and what were maybe some of your big highlights, your points, your takeaways, your thoughts on anonymous hobby content creators. I think the the most famous one is card porn, and we know what happened to them for the most part. Well, most people I think know that they got kind of obliterated from the hobby content world. But what was your motivation for that episode, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I think, when we're out consuming content, whether that's just from an entertainment perspective, from an education perspective, or when we're out dealing with people on social media, it's so easy to hide behind a fake picture, a non-real username, and nobody can even know who you are or what you stand for or where things are at. And I guess over the last few years, I've seen enough examples of deals gone wrong or bad advice being given that something stood out to me. It's like, well, why don't we expect more? Why don't we expect to know the identity of who we're dealing with? Who we're putting our trust in from a content perspective, who we're buying and selling, buying from and selling to. Why are we willing to accept anonymity for those entities? And so I was kind of was thinking about that, and had another friend, Ivan Lovegren, who made a post saying, hey, with all of this stuff going on, why now? Why today are we willing to accept that? And I was like, that's a great point. Why are we willing to accept that? And so, so I put together kind of an article talking a little bit about what anonymity has given us, and whether that's card porn, this Michael AI, card grader AI guy that popped up not too long ago. Eric Whiteback, which is not his real name. His real name is Ben Haynes, but he goes by Eric Whiteback. But why are you using a fake name and trying to bring in this audience? That stuff just rubs me the wrong way. I think when we're dealing with cards, when we're dealing with some of the money that's changing hands in the card world, I'm not a fan of anonymous accounts and doing business with or putting faith in anonymous accounts.
It's interesting that, and was your article, was it spurned on because of card porn or well, I say you just listed off 3 or 4. What were those was it those particular accounts that caused you to do the article and the pod, or and I ask because I can't think of any others really, maybe 1 or 2, but are there still some out there today, but that you haven't just named?
Those are the ones that inspired the article. I think there are a lot of smaller ones that are out there, right? There are smaller ones where buying and selling is taking place with random accounts that are out there on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and that type of thing. I'm not aware of any other major ones that have the weight behind them that, card porn or the Eric Whiteback account, some of those have behind them. But yeah, I think there's a lot of anonymous accounts that are doing business out there on a day-to-day basis, and people are just hoping that the deal goes through, and that they do things properly with goods and services, transactions, and those types of things to give themselves some protection. But I don't think there's, I think there's a lot of people who aren't necessarily taking those precautions.
And I think after the card porn fiasco, I don't think that we as a hobby are that accepting of these anonymous accounts anymore. And I mean, even the Eric Whiteback, that's Sports Card Guru. What's the actual handle? It's
his handle is Eric Whiteback, I believe. The Collectibles Guru, I think, is what the name thing says, okay, or however that works.
That's what I was looking for. The Collectibles Guru. Yeah, I think we know what that guy looks like, but I think the hobby learned a lesson based on what happened with card porn. I think it'll be a lot more difficult in the future. So based on, as a result of that, as a result of you talking about it and others talking about it, I don't think we're going to have to put up with that anymore. And if there is an account that starts to get some legs that is anonymous, I have a feeling that hopefully the brakes will get put on that sooner rather than later, and it won't become a big issue, or at least it won't have the power that those accounts have and had. So hopefully,
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
I hope so as well, for sure. Chris C says ensuring your PC is a must. I highly recommend it. Yes, no doubt about that. He also likes baseball card collector, investor, dealer Chris Sewell. Definitely the go-to content right there. If you're not following this guy, you need to. He is great. Super nice guy. Been on Sports Cards Live a couple times with me. Really great guy. Chris goes on to say anonymous or fake accounts have been around for many years. Shill bidding, especially these accounts, are hand in hand with, probably. And Jeremy Foul Fireball says, I think Jeremy Lee only knows what I look like, but I don't sell. I do know what you look like because we met, and I know you don't sell. Foul Fireball. Hobby Champs. Yeah, Hobby Champs is one that I don't know who he is, but communicate with. And but if you're Hobby Champs to me is harmless. So I don't need to know who he is until you start causing trouble. That's maybe you do cause trouble and I just don't know it. And Bob Boozle wants you to reveal yourself. All right, let's go on to the next thing. Too much of a good thing. This was another topic that interested you. I'd like you to take a moment and just talk about what you mean when you say too much of a good thing.
Yeah, it's an article that I put together in an episode that I did for Hobby News Daily. And what the concept behind this was, I was in my card closet and I was looking for something that was a part of my PC, but it took me like literally an hour to look through the boxes and binders that I had in there to find it. And there was a part of me that said, I like all of these cards, but there might be too much of a good thing if I can't find what I'm looking for. How can I appreciate it if I can't even find it? And so I started to go through a process of consolidation a little bit, going through that closet and said, do I really still appreciate this? Do I still really value this? Or are there things that I can do to maybe thin things down a little bit and have a more consolidated collection of things that I appreciate? And it's not, when some people talk about consolidation, they're talking about going down to 40 or 50 cards or something like that, or a single 2-row box. I'm still talking about tens of thousands of cards that I want to have as a part of my PC. But there were things like multiple complete sets of multiple copies of a set from the 80s or the 90s. And it's like, I probably only need one of these, right? And so I was able to thin down dozens of sets that were kind of duplicate sets that I had. Same thing with some of the singles that I had multiple copies of some singles. I had some sealed wax that I didn't really need anymore. And then I still had bulk. There were a lot of cards from my youth that were extras and doubles and triples and junk wax era type things that I had multiple monster boxes going on. And I really didn't need them, right? So I was able to thin things down to be able to find the things that I'm looking for in my PC. And so, it was kind of this idea of, hey, I love these cards and I love cards, but it's sometimes possible to have too much of a good thing.
I think that's a really good bit of advice. I take it seriously. I think a lot of people, I think it's probably resonating with people because, you have your collection, and I know personally, I don't go through it I don't make sure I set eyes on every card in my collection every month or every couple months. So, and your collections can get out of hand. So if you can't even find the card that you want to look at to enjoy owning it, maybe that is too much of a good thing. And then it comes down to what is right for each person. It's like I always say, whatever significant money is to you, you got to consider the investment potential or the return. Same thing goes with this. Whatever is the right amount of cards for you that you can keep a mental just control over. Maybe for you it's 20,000. Maybe for the 2-row box guys it's 100, and for me it's in that 2,000 range. That's literally my range, and I'm comfortable with that, and I kind of know where everything is. I think organizational skills also come into play here too, right? It depends how well organized you are, but once you get too many cards, and then there's the Chicago Cubs guy who's trying to get to 1 million Chicago Cubs card. 1 million. Think about that. Like, how do you even keep those organized? I think that's great. That's a great episode. People should go back and listen to if they haven't yet on the Waxback Hero podcast and get some thoughts on, get some additional context on that. Let's do some quick comments here and then go to the next topic, if that's okay with you, Mike.
Yeah, you bet.
Hobby Champ says, just Google a young George Clooney. Then you'll at least know what I look like. Very good. Tip of the Mid says, hello, my name is Jim, and I have too many sports cards. I'm committed to working on it this year. Thank you. Welcome, Tip of the Mid. Thank you for sharing. Appreciate that. Okay, let's go to the next topic that I have on here, which is contrasting headlines. We hear a lot, the hobby is dead. People love to put that on their YouTube thumbnails. The hobby is dead, the hobby is dying, crash, all these things. But then you see people, long live the hobby is alive, the hobby is healthy, good vibes, good energy. How do you, Mike, reconcile these two? We call them headlines. I think there's so much narratives. How do you reconcile these two contrasting thoughts from your position in the hobby?
It all comes down to perspective, right? You know, when we hear these comments, or when it seems like when I hear people saying these comments, they're doing it from a certain bias or a certain perspective, right? And so, you know, if you look at the early 2022 to what we saw in middle of 2023, it looked like the sky is falling, right? Every index on Card Ladder was down. You know, prices were crashing. Everything was going haywire and going terrible. But that's if you only look at it with that short little window, you know, that year and a half window or whatever. If you step back, we saw a much different story, right? Things were down off their peak, but they're still up from where they were in 2014, 15, and 16. And things look a whole lot healthier from that perspective. And then if you also think about the number of transactions that were happening, the number of people that were out buying and selling cards, the number of people that were still buying, and the number of cards being sold were still steady. And they were also higher, right? And so they were higher from 2015, 16. There was still about the same number of cards being sold from the peak of 2020. It's just that they were at more reasonable and more normal prices, right? And so that tells me that the hobby is healthy, and that the hobby was healthy at that time. And then when you think about the number of things that are the number of more shows that we have now compared to what we had back then, we have even more cards being bought and sold in person at those types of functions and events. We had the national set all-time record attendance last year. And so I think it all comes down to perspective on whether the hobby is alive and well, or whether you're going to view it as the hobby is dying. And that was what I was kind of trying to do with that article, is kind of say, take a step back and think about this from a big picture. You know, we have more people collecting today than we ever have before. Prices are more reasonable, which is probably healthy for everybody. The hobby is not dying. It's alive and well. Yes, there are things that could be better. Yes, there are things that are well off their peaks. And yes, there are people that have lost money because of that, if they were new entrants and bought at the top. But overall, the hobby interest is still there.
For sure. That's my sentiment as well. You mentioned the record-breaking national. I also just want to add the record-breaking Toronto Expo in November was unbelievable. And that show is now growing. They have now brought on 2 Montreal shows to their circuit and a Quebec City show. So the Toronto Sport Card Expo has grown from 2 shows a year, both in Toronto, to now 6 total a year. Also the one in Edmonton that's once a year. So that's a sign of growth and of health to me. But I wanted to get your perspective on that, and I appreciate that. The next one I want to get into is, and this is one I think this is one if you're not, you should be really proud of this one. I think people should listen to this, which are 5 things that you learned from running your LCS. And I'd like to kind of play along with you on this one, because I had an LCS myself for about 3.5 years, about the same duration as you did, but mine was 30 years earlier, from 91 till about 93, 94. I forget the exact months and all that, but 30 years ago. So I want to hear what you learned, and I'm going to kind of respond with, did I learn the same thing, if I can even remember? But this will be fun for me. So can you take us through the 5 key things you learned from running an LCS?
Yeah. So let me start with setting a little bit of context, when we talk about that, right? Because yes, I ran an LCS. It was part-time, but it was definitely a unique setup, right? So I had essentially a shop within a shop setup. We have a larger LCS in town that had expanded their square footage. They weren't filling the entire square footage. But the way that it was set up with the business, or the former business that was in this space that they expanded, there was kind of this sectioned off part of the store. And so ended up working on a deal where I basically subleased or rented that space from the main LCS and ran my own kind of independent shop within a shop setup. And so doing that, I didn't have to cover full overhead. I didn't have to cover full utilities. I didn't have to have my own full retail lease or anything like that. We were able to kind of work it out in a little bit of a unique setup. Now, I still have my 9-to-5 job, and so I was only open on Saturday and Sundays when we did this. And so I was running it part-time, couple days a week that I was in there, and that's the general structure that we had it. But in that 3.5 years, still being independent, there were things that I had to do, and there were lessons that I feel like I learned. And so and if you want to go back and forth, we can kind of see what your perspective is on some of these. But the first thing that I talked about that was probably the number one thing that I learned was customer service, and learning this idea that every customer who walked in the door was different, right? Some are very proactive in what they want. Some just want to stay by themselves and look. Some were very chatty and were there for hours, and other people just wanted to be left alone. It was their time to get out of the house for an hour or two, and they just wanted to go through a box of cards. But what I had to do is figure out what those customers were looking for. How can I best meet those needs? And it took a little bit to be able to develop that skill.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because what I'm hearing is a general life skill, not just a sports card store, manager kind of role or owner role, understanding what your customer wants. I mean, it's a business skill, but it's also a life skill to know your audience, right? And to be able to, it's like when you get into a taxi or an Uber. Sometimes I'm in the mood to talk. Sometimes I don't want to. And I kind of hope that the driver can pick up on which mood I'm in at that time. And I think that's what you're getting at, is simply being observant and sensitive to the customer, and then also being able to, provide them what they want, the service they want. So did I learn that back in the 90s? Probably not. I was a young punk running a card shop back then. So I don't think that I was that smart and just on it the way that you are. So let's go to the next one.
Yeah, as you say, it makes such a big difference, right? You hear those stereotypes, or you've been to shows, right, where the guy's just sitting there and doesn't say a word, right? Or if it gives you the feeling like they just want you out of there, right? There's such a big difference to that. So, yeah, it is a life skill, but it does make such a big difference when you're trying to run a people-centric business like a card shop, right? Negotiation is probably one of the other skills that I was able to refine, whether it's on the buying side or the selling side. Having that ability to negotiate prices that work for both you and the customer is something that was super important. And I feel like while I still have a ways to go in some of those conversations, I don't know that I'm the expert negotiator when it comes to cards. I feel like I definitely grew over that 3.5 years when it comes to negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, another life skill, and so, whether it's salary negotiation or buying a car or buying sports cards at the card show, negotiation. It's also like, I guess it's a skill, but it's also fun, and not everyone wants to negotiate. You mentioned some card shops, you walk in and they don't even say hello to you. That goes for some businesses. You can have, if you are someone who sets up at a card show amongst other vendors, and you are not one of those people who sits there with their eyes on their phone or the newspaper, back when that one, and someone to come to your table, if you don't even look up or say anything, it's kind of awkward. Like, I will go to a card show and I will go from booth to booth, and there'll be people sitting behind the table and they see me. And sometimes they will actually perk up. Sometimes they will say hi. Sometimes they will stand up and say hi and greet me or whoever. Sometimes they do the complete opposite. They just don't want to. It's like you're inconveniencing them. I don't understand what you're doing at the card show selling. So I think it's like you're talking about negotiating, but it's also having a presence and just being like, this should be social. This is a fun. It's a, there's a comment that came through, and it's right here from Michael. He says, if you're a hobbyist in the truest sense of the word, your hobby will never die because it's just a hobby. I take it to the next level. It's a lifestyle. The hobby is life for me. So, it's like, if I want to enjoy my life and I want to enjoy other people in my life, most of that is the hobby. I better be willing to talk to people. So any response? And then let's hear number 3.
Oh yeah. No, I think that's dead on. I mean, that's part of the reason that we do this, right? There is personal enjoyment and satisfaction, but the people is such a big reason that this can be so fun. The community that we can develop,
the relationships, the friendships.
Yeah,
100%.
Relationships are huge.
And that's why going to shows is so important, because we take these virtual relationships and friendships into the real world, into real life. And we can actually have a meal together, walk the aisles of the card show together, get a feel. Yeah, I love the community. I love it. Sorry, please continue.
Oh no, that's it. The next thing that I think that I learned, or that I had to do, is I had to get more creative when it comes to acquiring inventory, and I had to be more resourceful when it comes to acquiring new inventory. I was a little spoiled when I got started, right? I bought out a previous shop that was doing this same thing, and when I bought them out to get started with the shop, along with that came probably over 1 million cards of inventory. Right, there were a few 100,000 that were already out for sale. Kind of turn the key, and I was ready to go. But there was about 1 million cards of back inventory that was just sitting in boxes in the guy's garage and at the shop, in the back storage room. And so for the first year and a half or so, I didn't have to be very proactive to get new inventory. Like every weekend, I would just go grab a couple 3 rows that were sitting in the back, and I would start going through them and have new cards to be putting out in the cases and in the boxes. But after about a year and a half, that I got through all of that, and it started to dry up. And I was like, all right, now what? Right? I've got a few people that are proactively bringing me collections in to take a look at and to buy, but I needed to have a more consistent and steady stream. And so I started to proactively reach out to some of the other dealers, show dealers, shops, and things like that in our area to see about working out any kind of bulk deals that they were needing. I put the word out with family and friends, and the customers that were coming in to make sure they recognized and knew that I was always buying, I was always interested. I had to be much more assertive in trying to find new inventory to come in, and it took that's another thing that it took some different approaches to try to find and try to make those connections to identify inventory and collections to buy.
I have a question about that. So you're letting your social circles know that you're in the card business, you're a buyer. Have you ever bought something that you didn't want to buy in order to prove to your community that this is what you're doing? Like junk, like a load of junk wax era commons type of thing. Have you ever bought something like that, not wanting to, but again, to prove to the community, and maybe to try to get the better stuff later from that same person? Could be another reason why you did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely been deals that I took advantage of. I shouldn't say that way. I went through and bought with the hope that there would be future deals that came down later, right? Whether it's from, this is the stuff that I'm looking to sell now, I might be interested in moving these other cards later. Let's start with this, or and I know that because of some of those things, it led to, my brother mentioned that he sold you some cards, and so I had some stuff, and so I brought mine in, and that guy's stuff was way better, right? Or it was going to be a way better purchase for me. But that was one of the other things, that being that I dealt with so many low end cards, I could find a use for most of that stuff, right? So there's some junk wax era collections that really were tough to get through, but even junk wax era stars and things I would put in my quarter boxes and still can get a little bit of value out of. So I actually, as long as they weren't wanting ridiculous prices for them, I could still make use for a lot of that stuff.
Right. I think that's a great bit of advice, or one of the key things you learned was how to get creative to acquire inventory. Back in the early 90s, when I had my shop, the challenge didn't exist because people brought stuff in all the time. Because back in the early 90s, literally everybody was into sports cards. If you had a sign outside your LCS and you maybe had a curb sign or something like that, people came in. People were looking aggressively. It was different back then than now. So I can't really say that I had to get too creative back then. The cards just came into the store. You didn't have to really look elsewhere. Okay, I think that was the third thing that you learned. What was the next one?
The next one was getting good at identifying the right channel for the right cards when it comes to the ability to sell them, right? And so we talked a little bit about this with the online sales of Sportlots, COMC, and eBay being the right channel. In the shop, I had a ton of quarter boxes, and I had found customers who loved just buying a large amount of Ken Griffey Jr.'s or Jose Canseco's or Ryan Sandberg's or whoever it is, and they would fill up boxes and boxes of these quarter box cards that I had, right? So I knew that I had a market for these low-end star base cards, right? Over time, I eventually was able to also identify a few key customers who loved to buy bulk, and they didn't care if it was junk wax commons. They just loved going through mountains and mountains of cards. And so I knew that I may not get much for it, but I'd have an outlet even for these 30 or 40, 50,000 card collections of all junk wax era stuff. And so identifying the right channel for the right person, who I could go to when I got a certain type of card in, or if I'm evaluating a collection and trying to come up with a price, seeing if there's going to be value for me when I was going to make an offer on this collection, knowing that I've got these different channels allowed me to get a lot more collections that other people would have just completely passed on because they didn't have a way to sell a 25-cent Jose Canseco card, and I knew that I did. They didn't have a way to sell a partial set of some Allen and Ginter set when I knew that I could list that on Sportlots and it's already mostly a number order and it's going to go really quick. I've got an avenue to be able to sell that. Those were foundational and letting me get some more inventory that other people would have just completely passed on.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I have nothing from the 90s on that one. So let's go to your last, your last thing you learned.
Yeah. I think the last that I would say is I learned that I could do it. When I was getting into it, people from day one, there were people that told me low end cards aren't worth your time. You're never going to make any money off of doing this type of thing. You're going to get in over your head. There were a lot of naysayers, and I mean, there were people that were positive and supportive along the way too, but I learned that I could do it. I learned that I could think through some of these issues. I learned that I could navigate some of the things that you've got to navigate when you're trying to run a business and be profitable and not have it suck your money away, but actually add money, back to your life. And so getting the confidence that I would be able to do this, I was able to identify a niche market within our niche market and capitalize and make money selling low end cards. That was really meaningful to me. And it that added to the overall satisfaction that I got from running this shop is learning that, yes, I could do this. And yes, I can do this. And I can have a lot of fun doing it.
That's a good one to learn. So you had fun doing it. You wrapped up the shop. You no longer have your LCS. You recently closed that business. Why?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. I think primarily, as I mentioned, I started this in mid 2020 in the midst of COVID when many things were shut down. Right. And so for the next 3.5 years until pretty much the end of 2023, I was working my day job Monday through Friday. and I'd spend Saturday and Sunday afternoons at the shop. And so I was essentially working 7 days a week. And yes, it was fun, but it was still, taxing, right? There were still demands that were put on my time to be able to do that 7 days a week for 3.5 years. And then as my kids are getting older, there's more and more activities for the kids. There's things that my wife and I want to be able to do. It was kind of like it was a good run. I had a lot of fun. I made some money at this, but I'd like to kind of get my weekends back and get a little more margin and balance in my life. And so pivoting back to selling online only instead of having the physical shop as well was a decision that I made, last fall, and kind of got things wrapped up so that I'd be able to have a little more margin and spend a little more time with the family and not have that weekend commitment every weekend. Like I said, it was a lot of fun to do for 3.5 years. And I'm glad I was able to do it, but having those weekends back now for these last couple months has been kind of nice.
Yeah. Well, congrats on doing it, proving you could, seeing it through, and making the decision to close it up and move on to other things. I think that takes some guts as well. So kudos to you for evolving in your hobby experience. Back in 94 or so, when I closed up my store, it was because I was just busier and busier in university and, going for dealing with education. And I just, study. I didn't have time to run the business as well. It was really as simple as that. I didn't have the internet to go to. There was no internet back then, obviously, but that was our reasons for closing up back then. Okay, let's go to some comments. We've had some great stuff come through. First of all, Orlando from A Collector's Dream has joined the show. Orlando, good to see you. Welcome. Brett Miles said, too much of a good thing and what's right for you. Great comments. Took me many years to figure out what really connected me in this hobby. And I know Brett, and Brett's a great hobbyist. Bob Boozle said the hobby consists of midichlorians, I think, a microscopic life form that resides within us all. Use the hobby for good. Great advice, Bob Boozle. Use the hobby for good. Good evening to Stukes, who's joined us. Welcome to the show, Stuke. Good to see you. Bob Boozle says, sports cards are a lifestyle for me and a nightmare for my wife. I wouldn't have it any other way. Good on you, Bob. Best of everything to the wife. Dan says, my wife sees my card collection as her way to make some quick money after I croak. I mean, right? There's value in a lot of these things. Brett Miles says, geez, I'm just getting misty-eyed with all the feels, thinking of all the great aspects of this hobby, the chat boards, great people, monthly shows, moments where I picked up great PC items. Seems like Brett is reminiscing as he's taking in Sports Cards Live tonight. He also says, this hobby is fantastic. I lean into it for the positives. The negatives is just noise I filter out. I control my enjoyment in this hobby. The hobby does not control the way I enjoy card collecting. I think that's a great attitude. And it takes something to be able to do that too, Brett. So kudos to you. And then Tip of the Mid says the hobby is so much different now than it was 30 years ago. Better in some ways, worse in others. What are your thoughts? Let's start with you, Mr. Mike Sommer. What are your thoughts on Tip of the Mid's comment here?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is better in some ways and worse than others. I think the internet has given us so many more opportunities to find the cards that we're looking for our collection. It's no longer about just what happens to show up at your LCS or at a show, but we have so many more opportunities to find the cards we're looking for that we didn't necessarily have 30 years ago. And that same perspective, I think when we talked about the whole idea of a hobby community and friendships and relationships, the internet has given us that opportunity as well. All of the people that you've had on your show, that I've had on my show, us having this conversation right now and having an interaction and a chat with everybody that's watching, that wasn't possible, that much longer ago. Along those same lines, though, I think it's also on the flip side, there's been, additional scamming opportunities that have come up that we have to all be more diligent and vigilant and aware of. And I think that is one of those flip sides. But overall, from my perspective, I think, things are much more positive than they were before. I'd say the other thing is, and I know this is some people have different perspectives on this, but I think one of the things that is worse than 30 years ago is, personally, I liked when we had multiple manufacturers making cards for multiple sports, and we had a lot more competition when it comes to the cards that we were buying. And so I wish that we were back in that world where we had multiple manufacturers making cards. And so that'd be one more thing that I'd say maybe, I wish was a little bit different or more like it was back then.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, the biggest impact on change in the hobby has been the internet, the whole global economy thing. Tip of the mitt says right here, first thing on my mind was the internet as well. And what I think here's a way to kind of bring it all back in one succinct sort of thought, at least for me, is back then a print run of 10,000 was very, very rare. Only 10,000 Stanley Cup holograms were produced, or only 10,000. What I forget the baseball insert, the real night elite, Donruss Elite or something like that.
Yep.
Only 10,000. Oh my God, I got to hit one of those. The Lombardi Trophy that came out in Pro Set Football. What was that number to? 20,000 or 10 or 20,000? Like that was rare. Nowadays, one of ones, not so hard to find the one-on-one you're looking for with the reach that we have. So to me, 10,000 was really rare, and now a card out of 10 is not all that hard to find. I think that kind of sums up where a lot about where the hobby has gone. Any response to that, Mike, before I move on?
No, I think you're right. I mean, that's the production levels are not necessarily what I want to go back to when I talk about multiple manufacturers. But at the same time, I think there is something to that, where what was once rare would be laughed at now when we think about it being rare.
It's like there are people who have said, in my chat and elsewhere, that they need to they need to serially number everything now. Well, if they serially numbered base cards, Topps baseball, Upper Deck hockey, Prism basketball, whatever, I mean, these are going to be in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. It might do more damage than good for base cards. Maybe the request should be, serially number everything except for the mass-produced base cards. Any parallel, any insert, number those. I'd be more okay with that. But yeah, it is the volumes back then were completely obscene. But not only that, when I'm talking about 10,000 being rare and hard to find, not just because they were needle in the haystack to pull, but also because you were limited for the most part to your regional card shops and card shows. There weren't even trade nights back then. So at least none that I was aware of. So yeah, really, the hobby has changed so much, but the world has changed. I think it's all related to that. Okay, let's do some comments here again. Dan's Vintage says, Mike has gained a ton of respect in the hobby for how he has carried himself and communicated about his experiences. I don't think I've ever heard a bad thing about you, Mike. You're just a very pleasant guy to talk to and interact with. So thank you for coming on tonight with me as well. Brett Miles says, online buying 100% changed my approach to what was possible in this hobby. eBaying since 2000 gained many, many PC items because of it. Of course, Bob Boozle is a fan of competition. I think most of us are for the most part. So I think we'd all like that. Mark Santucci takes the contrarian view and says, YouTube, not eBay for me. I like the stores. Mark likes the in-person experience, and I think that's a noble thing to like. Tip of them says, yes, those were low numbers, 10,000, 5,000 back in the day. Those were low numbers back then. And Brad says a print run of 199 puts me in a let's just be patient mode. Yeah, back then it was like, oh my God, I'll never find a card. Only 199 made. And now it's like, I can wait for the 30th copy to come and see what happens then. All right, I wanted to go on to this now with you, Mike. Your thoughts on content in general, content that's out there. And I don't want to, I want to tee this one up for you, but there's something specific I want you to talk about. Do you know what I'm getting at?
When it comes, I think maybe
Gary V. Let me Gary V. You mentioned to me in our conversation earlier this week something about Gary V. Can you share what that was about?
Yeah. So I think I was listening to one of Gary Vee's podcasts, and he said something in it that resonated with me, because I think it had been bouncing around in my head in a slightly different way, and it kind of put words to what I had been thinking about. And it was this idea that um, that when we're creating content and we're trying to share our experiences, and maybe we're trying to help educate others on some things that they might want to think about when they're, working in the hobby or dealing in the hobby or buying cards or looking for cards, there's this whole idea that I don't necessarily have to convince anyone that I'm right. It's not my job to convince somebody that I'm right all the time. It's my job to share my experience, to share my knowledge, share things that I know are true, that have worked for me. And if somebody finds value in that, great. That's the person that I'm trying to reach, or that's the person that I'm trying to connect with. It's not my job to convince the naysayers or the people that argue with me about it, and tell me that I'm way off base, and all of those types of things. And I think for a long time, there were times where I would get a little bit bent out of shape, or I'd be, disappointed, or I don't know the right word for it, when I would get some of that pushback, because I felt like, why can't they just see what I'm trying to say here? Why can't they just see what I'm trying to share? And eventually that kind of clicked. It's like, you know what? That's not my job. It's not my job to convince them. It's just my job to share my experience and to do what I can to help educate.
I think that's a wonderful self-realization to come to, and because it takes so much pressure off you, and so much expectation comes off. And I'm going to, as I go to bed tonight, as I'm falling asleep, I'm going to try and kind of do a bit of a self-audit on a lot of what I've talked about on this platform for almost 4 years, and kind of see about, am I trying to convince people of things, or am I just doing what you're doing? And I'm going to try to be more like you if I haven't been yet, because I think it'll make my life easier, and I think it'll be better for the audience. I think it'll just be more authentic, and there's no pressure. It's like some people say agreement is not, we don't need to agree on things, but at least hear me out. And then the other thing is that you don't have to love everything I say. You don't have to agree with everything I say, but maybe in a, for at least my show, over a 2-hour episode, me or my guests are going to say one or two things that maybe you have to take. It could be an hour and 58 minutes of absolute nonsense, just pure entertainment, something to do because you're bored, and maybe 2 minutes of worthy content that you have a key takeaway as the viewer. That's kind of, to me, is good enough. I'm good enough if you get one or two good, maybe one or two good takeaways a month, even. It doesn't have to be every episode. Nothing wrong with being entertaining, but I'm going to think about that for myself and try to strive to be more like you in that way. Cause I think that's a good evolution for myself to go through.
Yeah. And it fits in that too, with that idea of, we can't be, especially people who are writing a blog or putting out a podcast, we can't, and it took me a while to realize this too, we can't be all things to all people, right? The stuff that we are passionate about, the stuff that we create, there's going to be some people that hate it, right? There's going to be people that think I'm an idiot for what I'm doing and have no interest in doing any of this. And there's going to be people that think you're an idiot and that you can't come up with your own, ideas, and you haven't got your own original idea in your head, right? You're going to have people that think that stuff too, right? But it took me a while to get comfortable with, I'm not going to be able to be all things to all people. I may never have the biggest social media following or the biggest, podcast audience or whatever. But when I can get that message from somebody that said, hey, I've been listening to what you're doing with Sportlots, and last month I made enough to cover my car payment from selling cards on Sportlots. Like, that is all I needed to hear. Like, that's the reason that I'm doing this, because somebody who would have never thought about doing that, and then are now in a situation where every month they're making enough selling cards on Sportlots that they're covering their car payment, and finding value in some of the stuff that I'm sharing. That's the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing. That hits home. And even if it's a handful of people that are doing that, that makes it worth it for me.
Exactly. Exactly. That makes it worth it for sure. I go through the same thing. You know, I'll do an episode, and the next morning I'll wake up and I'll go through, you know, my DMs, and someone will say, you know, last night's episode really resonated with me, or your guest was awesome, or whatever it is. It's like that one message is okay. One person found it valuable, useful, interesting, educational, whatever it was, inspirational. That makes it worthwhile, right? That makes it worthwhile for guys like us who do this on a regular basis. Let's jump into some comments again. We're gonna go back to the rare cards serially numbering. Michael said if they serial number all cards, then serial number cards won't be special, sort of like multicolor patches. I wonder about that though, because to me, it would. I think you'd see like a big divide. You know, you some cards are going to be better, and you know the low numbered, and then the high numbered is going to be what they still are. I don't know that serial number cards are that special anyway, because many are. So I don't know that I completely agree with that comment, Michael. Michael goes by Linda's first here as everybody, but his name is Michael. I don't know about that. And then you say sort of like multicolor patches. Yeah, a diamond. No one really enjoys diamond. I shouldn't say that. I'm not going to say that. That's completely wrong. What I was about to say. So I'm going to check that. Stop and just say that I think when you combine a low serial number with an interesting jersey card or patch, you have something that is a bit more special. Mike, anything to add to that comment?
No, I kind of get where he's coming from, but I think, you know, we're also already at that point, like you said, right? I think we're already at the point where serial numbered cards aren't as special as they used to be. I wouldn't mind the idea of serial numbering everything even if it's not serial numbered, under knowing what the real print runs are, maybe is the bigger thing. And I think that's what a lot of people are getting at when they're talking about every card being serial numbered, is we want to know the print runs. I think for some things, like you said, it could be worse, right? Because we'll know that, yeah, there really are, I don't know, 1 million of every Topps flagship baseball card out there. But I think for some things, if there's 1 million Topps flagship base cards out there, if we knew the print runs or everything was serial numbered and we found out there was only 100,000 of every Allen and Ginter card, would we see a differentiation in price between a rookie card in Allen and Ginter versus a rookie flagship card, because there's only 100,000 of the base Ginter and 1 million of the flagship? Would it introduce something like that where we could see some additional differentiation for some of these products? Maybe. I don't know. I'd like to see, but I would like to know the print runs. I wish we did know the print runs for these products.
You make a great point on print runs versus serial numbering. That's a good layer to add for sure, in my opinion. Hobby Champ says they need to at least serial number or short print the base rookie cards. I liked when they did that, and that's a fair request. Chris says a lot of us don't buy the SSP thing. Number them, or the SSP designation is too vague. I couldn't agree more with that. I'm not a fan of SP and SSP. If you're going to do that, yeah, I'd rather you just number the cards. Chris Perkins says even though there's 5,000 Stanley Cup hologram cards, they're still very hard to find. They are, but not like you'll find a couple at the card show. You'll find a couple on eBay at any given time. But they are still tough to find. Those were needle in the haystacks for sure. Bob Boozle says, don't do a self-audit, Jeremy. Your content is fine. Think of babes like I do when I fall asleep. Thanks for the tip, Bob Boozle. Appreciate it very much. The professor has entered the chat. He says, been listening on my iPad. Great discussion. Moved to my computer so I can say hello. Hello to you, professor. Dan's Vintage says, totally agree with Mike. Find your lane in the hobby and enjoy it. To which Chris C says, I have a lane, but I can't seem to find the stop sign. I think that's hilarious, because I think that is something we all go through. Yeah, I got my lane, but my brakes aren't working. You know, I'm just everywhere. So you need to find your lane, but you also need the governor. You need the governor to make sure that you're not breaking speed limits somehow. And maybe you know, if you don't, you know, maybe that governor is your wife. Maybe that governor is your budget, whatever it is. Some people need to do that, or you can get into financial turmoil, because this hobby is so much fun and we love these cards. So Dan says, totally agree with, oh, sorry, we did that one already. Brett Miles here said, convincing people versus just being authentic in one's comments is huge. The content I enjoy the most is where people are just honest, passionate, and respectful, loving that there are new outlets to share. For sure. Good stuff, Brett. The Card Hunter has joined us, has enjoyed the insight and conversation. The journey is often better than the destination. And I mean, that's what life is about right there. That's why I said earlier, Mike, I love those 10, 15, 20-year hobby projects because that's the journey. I enjoy building things, and I want it to last forever. It's somewhat, you notice, Mike, people will build a set, they'll be advertising, they're looking for cards, and then they finish it and they break it up. They don't care anymore.
Yeah.
Which I'm not judging. That I've done that too. But it's like once the journey is over, the destination is kind of a bit of a letdown. You need another journey. I think we as humans need journeys. We need things to look forward to. If you don't enjoy the present, but having something to look forward to is pretty nice as well, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that we all have our different hobby projects, and or the people who continue to stay in the hobby and have been in the hobby their whole life. It's because they found a connection and they found value in something that they're passionate about and they want to pursue and build on and kind of acquire, right? And when you don't have that connection that you're passionate about, when you don't have that destination or that focus of the journey that you're going to, that's when I think we find ourselves getting into trouble, or we find ourselves the hobby burnout phrase or terminology. It's because we're in that world where we don't really have a clear path of where we're headed.
Yeah, well said. Okay, let's do this one here. Dan says, dude, I have 367 subscribers and I cherish every positive comment. The positive feedback is energy. 100%, Dan, 100%. And Dan's Vintage Baseball PC, everybody. Go give him a sub on YouTube if you haven't yet. He's at 367. We have the power to get him to 400 right here, right now, everybody. Hobby Champ says, Jeremy's content is one of the only few long-form hobby content creators I can get all the way through regularly. Well, thanks, Hobby Champs. That is really nice to hear. T. Jones says, serial numbering is cumbersome and nonsense. I mean, I don't know how cumbersome the machine does it, so it's not that cumbersome for the person doing it. And nonsense, I don't know. It's not nonsense. Maybe I'm missing the underlying intent of this comment. Mike, do you have anything to say to that one?
Yeah, I'm not sure, what he's getting at. I think, if anything, maybe it's to that point of serial numbering when they're, large print runs, what value does it really add to know that you've got 858,627 out of, 1,000,002, whatever it is, but I'm not really entirely sure.
All right. Well, we'll see if you want to clarify further, T. Web02 says, knowing the print run is what killed Project 2020 when the Shore Griffey hit 90,000. It's an astute comment. I don't know personally that that's what killed the Topps Project 2020, but I do know that when that card came out, that seemed to be like the peak of the Topps Project 2020, and then it kind of just became not what it was for a while there. It kind of died off. So what did you take part in Topps 2020, Mike? Did you collect those cards?
Yeah, I did. And I still have probably, I don't know, I'm probably pushing 200 of the 400 that I've got. Some of them I bought on the way up when it was rising towards that Shore Griffey. And then others I've bought since then at less than $5 each. And so, I was pretty patient on some of that and I'm kind of filling in with some of the ones that I liked, but I'm buying them for, a third or whatever of what they were when they were listed on Topps.com.
Right. I remember that craze. I bought a few off the Topps website myself and kind of wish that it is what it is, but I don't think I own a single one anymore. I think I just kind of lost interest and liquidated them because I just wasn't interested in it anymore. But I must say that whole period of time was a lot of fun because those artists were people. And if you went to the national I guess the last one was that last one before the pandemic, where several of them were out. The artists were out at the I forget which national, 2020. It was the first one back.
21 probably.
21 in Chicago, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it must have been that one. I remember being at some events where some of the artists were actually at the events, and you got to meet them and see some of their other art, and that was kind of cool. And I think they brought some new people into the hobby by virtue that they had their own social media followings at that time. I don't know how many. Maybe it's only 5 people that stayed in, but at least there was more exposure. So that was pretty cool. Guys, let's welcome Brandon DeSantis to the show. First timer from Canada. Brandon, welcome to the show. Thanks for letting us know you're here. And yeah, welcome to the chat on Sports Cards Live here. Mike, we're getting to the finish line here. There's still a few things that we didn't get to, but there's one that I think you were passionate about. So we're gonna dedicate the next 2 or 3 minutes to it, which was how can we help new entrants into the hobby? How can we help them kind of wade through the noise and figure out how to approach the hobby that would be the most effective for them? Share your thoughts with us on that topic, please.
Yeah, as I went at the very beginning of our conversation, I talked about the inspiration for waxpackhero.com. And one of those first things that I wanted to do is say, hey, there's so much that had changed from when I collected as a kid to what it was like collecting in 2015. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a way that other people who were returning to the hobby and in a similar situation that I had just gone through would be able to figure it out a little bit easier or a little bit quicker. And that's why I started to create that content. And I think we're in this whole nother phase of that we've seen over the last 3 years or so, right? I talk to people all the time now who have come back to the hobby or getting back into the hobby, or maybe they collected it as a kid, but they don't collect anymore, but their kids now are getting to that age and they remember collecting, but they don't know where to point them because, this is a completely different world. And so I've been thinking, I don't have the answer for this, but I've been thinking a lot about it is how do I create the content that can help educate these new and returning collectors on some of the history of the hobby, some of the things that we have seen over these last few years that seem like brand new, big, like ordeals, things that are happening for the first time that we're never going to be able to overcome it. But how do we help see that, no, this has happened in the past and we were able to overcome it, or the community was able to overcome it and get past it. We've seen rising and falling prices. We've seen manufacturers come and go. We've seen the types of cards or prospects or whatever it is that people are passionate about ebb and flow and fall into favor and get out of favor. And I think about how can I help bridge that education gap and help some of these new entrants that we've seen over the last few years get up to speed so that they don't maybe make some of the same mistakes that I made in the past or whatever. And it kind of gets to, I'm going to do what I can to write. I'm going to do what I can to talk about some of these things on the podcast. But I think more voices with a focus on education and less voices focused on buy this card. This is the next hottest card. Go to this, look at me at this show, whatever it might be. That is, some of the content that we see out there that doesn't really do much to educate. I feel like if we had more voices trying to educate, we'd be all a little bit better off. And some of these new entrants coming into the hobby would be better off in the long run.
So I feel like we do have a lot of that, but it's just they just don't have the reach, the marketing behind them to reach the people who you're speaking of. Because I mean, there is, I don't know if lots is the right word, but there are content creators out there who are offering their experience, you among others, their experiences, their tips for how to do this or that better in the hobby, what kind of supplies to use, what to take to card shows. We do see these things. I think a lot of content creators do offer it, but maybe they're not the first content creators that a new entrant finds when they go searching on the internet for tips and tricks. So I don't know if the answer, if the solution is feasible without having a staff. Think about one of the most notorious content creators, Jeff Wilson, and Sports Card Investor. He's literally probably the first the first thumbnail you see on YouTube if you're new and you type in sports cards. I'm guessing that he's gonna be one of the first ones you're gonna see. But he's got a team. He's got a whole team working there to help with SEO and just really to exploit the tools, all the social media platforms. So is the solution feasible in your estimation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, right? There is a lot of educational content that is available. There are people that have great YouTube channels that are education based. I think you hit on it, though. I think that distinction is those aren't necessarily the channels or the creators that some of the newer entrants see at first, or even know what to look for or know what to search for to get educated. And I don't know. That's the thing. Is it feasible? Yes, I think it's still feasible because it doesn't have to be on day one. It's more like, how can we help people understand that there is more to learn, and then get them in that direction where they can find those additional resources to learn. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There's a reason, and some of those people are entertaining, and to some extent that's what people are looking for, first too, is to be entertained. And so, like I said, when we started, I don't know the full answer on how to make that happen. I hoped, though, to be able to find a way that we can connect more of these folks with those resources that are available when they get to that point where they want to learn a bit more about the history of the hobby, some good ways to approach collecting, some alternate ways to approach collecting, that type of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to me, new entrants hopefully find content that resonates with them. Hopefully they search harder and they don't just, only watch one content creator, whether it be the first one they find or anybody else. Get a rounded sort of spectrum of thoughts and theories and just ideas, experiences for the hobby. I think that's what hopefully that's what new entrants are doing, but can't really speak much more to it much more than that, because I don't really know how people are entering the hobby. We're gonna wrap up here right away. I'll go to some more comments that have come in, Mike, and then we'll get final. And I'll ask the chat guys, get your final comments in. Tell Mike how much you've enjoyed him on the show here, and we'll get through those, and then we'll get Mike's final comments, and we will wrap up. I want to say hello to Chad Shipper, late to the party. Can't wait to replay the show tomorrow. Chad, thanks for dropping in. Good to see you, buddy. Michael here says, I can't help singing Wax Pack Hero in my head like Jukebox Hero. Yeah, I get that for sure. T-Dot says the current bid on the Gretzky 1979 O-Pee-Chee unopened case of 16 boxes with 48 packs each. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. Is it $2.58 million Canadian on Heritage right now, which I did the math. That works out to $3,255 approximately per pack. Chris C says, in my opinion, no reason why hyped rookies should be worth more than Hall of Famers. I can get mint Tim Duncan rookies cheaper than Victor Wembanyama. And Chris, 100% agree with you. It's that instant gratification. What have you done for me lately? It's the way society is right now, the way the hobby is right now. I'm with you. It makes no sense, except that these guys are who are on highlights every night right now. So that's all I can say. It's the only thing that makes sense to me, but it does not make sense to me that's where things are at. Where'd it go here? Mark Santucci, it just jumped around on me here. Well, first of all, he says 5 out of 5 stars on the show. Thank you, Mark. Bob Boozle says Mike is thoughtful, hardworking dude. Makes me look bad. Eric Stefano, awesome show. Thank you very much, Eric. Appreciate that. Mark Santucci says all of my guys do videos on ways to buy cards for your interest, education, like what Mike said. Yes, Jeremy, you're right about others. Thank you, Mark Santucci. Brett says new entrants to the hobby can sometimes see the shiny, expensive car and all of a sudden have unrealistic expectations. I appreciate a good grassroots conversation with newbies. Yeah, that's well said. A grassroots conversation. Just got to get them to listen to it and to get into the conversation. Foul Fireball. Good seeing Mike again. Good show. Thank you, Foul Fireball. T-Dot says all markets are rational. Michael says another great night on SCL. Thanks, Jeremy. And thank you, Mike. Thank you, Michael, for joining. Apologies for the comments that I missed tonight. Mike Sommer, final comments over to you. And then we're going to wrap this thing up.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun. I love getting a chance to talk through the hobby and the opportunity to go 2 hours and get into some of these topics a little bit deeper and have some back and forth. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. This 2 hours went by super fast for me. Absolutely. Brett says, fantastic episode. Love the conversation and the thoughts from both of you. Big jolt of hobby energy. Well, that's great. Peace out, hobby champs. Craig's Cards, thank you so much. Chris C, thank you. He says, no, not all markets are rational. I gave an example why. Duncan versus Wembanyama. Yeah, they're not. You know what? Efficient markets are rational. The sports card hobby is not an efficient market. I think it's quite as simple as that. But more to look into for sure. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. All right, guys, that's going to do it. I will be back tomorrow night for the PWCC weekly hockey auction ending watch party and Monday night for MC Mondays Live, their focus auction, $1,000 items plus ending on their YouTube store, on their YouTube platform. That's a lot of fun. Tons of action. Please, if you're available, join me tomorrow night and Monday night. But if not, everybody, have a great week ahead. Mike, thank you to you once again. You stay right there. Everybody else, again, have a great week. This episode of Sports Cards Live is now